Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a case that really just fundamentally shatters the trust we place in our care providers.
Mm.
It's the story of Kristen Gilbert, a registered nurse who used her specialized knowledge not to heal, but to hunt the most vulnerable patients under her care at a Veterans Affairs medical center.
Yeah.
This deep dive is about tracing the horrific trajectory of a woman whose, well, narcissistic need for attention turned her medical ward into a killing field.
And the setting is so crucial to understanding the betrayal here. We're talking about the Northampton VAMC in Massachusetts.
Mm.
This is a place that's meant entirely for the dignified care of veterans,
Right.
a population that's often frail, completely reliant on the staff. And what unfolded there between 1989 and 1996 wasn't just a failure of trust. It was a statistical impossibility that centered on one specific nurse,
Kristen Gilbert.
Kristen Gilbert. Our mission today is to really dissect the background, the development of her dark methods, and the motive, which disturbingly seemed to center entirely around the thrill of control and, the shallow pursuit of attention.
And the irony starts right away, doesn't it? It starts with this ominous nickname her coworkers gave her.
It does.
On the surface, Gilbert presented this facade of competence, of dedication. She was active, well-liked. She even organized things like gift drives and secret Santa events.
Right, the model employee.
Exactly. But her coworkers, they just couldn't ignore the sheer volume of patients crashing and dying on her shift. It started as, I guess, the darkest possible form of workplace humor.
Exactly. And it's the kind of morbid joke that, sadly exists in these high-stress medical environments. It's a way to cope with constant mortality.
Sure.
They noticed the pattern, and they joked. They started calling her the angel of death.
Hmm.
But the numbers, as they always do, they stopped being funny and they started being terrifying.
And that's where the investigation truly began, right? Moving beyond just an anecdote, beyond dark humor, to, well, irrefutable statistical proof. What was the core data point that shifted the view from a joke to, real horror for the investigators?
The core data point was just overwhelming. So in the 7 years that Gilbert worked in Ward C, which was generally the most acute ward,
Okay.
there were approximately 350 deaths. Gilbert was on duty for nearly half of those.
Half.
Nearly half.
Wow.
Over 180 deaths. So investigators, when they realized the scale of this anomaly, they had to calculate the probability of this occurring naturally, given standard shift rotations, randomization, all of that.
Right, they had to rule out coincidence. So what did that calculation reveal? What were the odds?
Well, the finding was mathematically breathtaking. The probability of one nurse being on duty for that many deaths, just by pure chance, was calculated to be less than 1 in 100 million.
1 in 100 million.
1 in 100 million. At that level of statistical deviation, you are no longer talking about luck or misfortune. You're talking about deliberate intervention. The angel of death stopped being a joke, and it became a chilling, quantifiable reality.
Wow. That statistic alone tells us this was not random. But people like this, who abuse trust so profoundly, they usually show signs long before they ever put on a uniform.
Hmm.
So let's look at what we know about Kristen Heather Strickland before she became Nurse Gilbert. She was born in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1967 into what seemed like a stable, affluent background.
Yeah, on the surface, everything looked ideal. Her father was an electronics executive,
Yeah.
her mother a homemaker and part-time teacher.
And she was smart, right? Excelled academically.
Very smart, graduated high school at 16, was sharp enough to be in the math club. She had all the advantages, all the intellectual capacity for success. But if you scratch beneath that veneer of affluence and, scholastic aptitude,
Yeah.
you find a person who was already living a profound double life. It was marked by escalating manipulation and pathological lying.
And we're not just talking about typical teenage angst here. The sources detail active, calculated manipulation, often involving threats of self-harm or violence. When did this pattern of creating crises for attention really start to solidify?
Oh, quite early. Friends and family noted her habitual lying, but the method of control was the key takeaway. She manufactured crises involving herself to manipulate other people.
How so?
She had a history of faking suicide attempts. And not just as a cry for help, but specifically to coerce people into giving her attention or doing what she wanted or preventing them from leaving her. It was a power play, really, just disguised as vulnerability.
That seems like a really unsustainable way to manage relationships. I remember one specific instance from her college years at Bridgewater State College that Escalated beyond just a threat.
That's right. During her time there, a fake suicide attempt was so serious, so convincing, that the college officials actually ordered her into psychiatric treatment.
Wow, that should have been a massive red flag.
It should have been.
Yeah.
But she continued to escalate. There's an even more alarming detail from her teenage years. She allegedly told an ex-boyfriend that she had eaten glass.
Eaten glass.
Yeah, it established a clear pattern. When relationships became unstable or she felt rejected, she escalated the danger, either to herself or through violent threats against others. And this was a pattern she'd had since her early teens.
And yet, she seems to have moved past these serious psychiatric episodes very quickly. Despite being ordered into treatment, she transfers colleges, finishes her diploma at Greenfield Community College,
Becomes a registered nurse in 1988.
and marries Glenn Gilbert that same year. It's just this rapid, functional march straight into a position of high trust.
She was extremely adept at compartmentalization. She had the high intelligence needed to quickly absorb medical knowledge and, perform with competence in a high-stakes environment.
So she could look the part.
Perfectly.
Uh.
Her capacity to appear dedicated, competent, and socially appropriate masked a severe underlying personality structure that required constant validation and chaos. That confluence of intelligence and pathology made her uniquely dangerous when she started at the VAMC in 1989.
Which leads us directly into the period where her professional life and this profound need for dramatic attention just violently intersected. Gilbert was good at her job, described as very, very smart, and she excelled under pressure, especially during medical emergencies.
And that's the absolutely critical piece of the puzzle. She thrived during codes. For most people, a code blue, a medical emergency, is terrifying. It's chaotic. It's stressful.
Of course.
For Gilbert, it was her stage. The crisis provided the intense adrenaline rush she craved, a sensation that before had only been met by faking her own self-destruction.
So in the emergency, she was the hero, the calm, proficient, vital person in the room.
Exactly. This inherent thrill-seeking that drove her teenage manipulation found its perfect lethal outlet in the life-or-death drama of Ward C.
And the narrative takes an even darker turn when she begins an extramarital affair with James Perot, a VA police officer who worked at the hospital. Suddenly, that high-stakes environment had an audience who was personally invested in her performance.
And the affair wasn't just an indiscretion. According to the prosecution, it became the direct fuel source for the manufactured codes.
What do you mean?
Hospital rules mandated that police officers like Perot needed to be present at any medical emergency.
Ah, I see.
So prosecutors explicitly argued that Gilbert used her medical knowledge to orchestrate these life-or-death situations, these codes, not just for the thrill of the crisis itself, but specifically to summon and gain the undivided attention of Perot.
So she was essentially orchestrating sudden cardiac arrests in vulnerable patients as a perverse way to get her boyfriend to rush to her side, watch her perform, and validate her superiority.
It was pure narcissistic validation through lethal means. The shocking details show just how brazen and unprofessional this attention-seeking became.
Like what?
Coworkers were reportedly taken aback by their public displays of affection. We're talking about playing footsie and touching during emergency operations.
During a code, while a veteran was fighting for his life.
Yes. The ultimate medical crisis was, for them, just a dramatic backdrop to their romance.
It's hard to process that level of callousness, especially in a place where people are fighting for survival. And all this time, while she was using death as a tool for flirting, her marriage to Glenn Gilbert was just
dissolving.
And that marital breakdown once again exposed her violent control issues. Glenn Gilbert provided devastating testimony. He claimed his wife tried to kill him.
Kill him.
Twice. By poisoning. And these claims weren't taken lightly. They formed part of the broader pattern of her calculated violence.
Can you elaborate on the details of those alleged poisoning attempts? I heard one happen when he was actually hospitalized himself.
That's right. So Glenn reported these suspicious, unexplained illnesses after eating food she prepared, which suggests a slow, low-grade poisoning attempt at home.
Okay.
But the second attempt was an overt act of medical assault. He was hospitalized at a civilian facility for some routine ailment. Gilbert visited him and allegedly injected a clear liquid directly into his 5E line.
Yes. Glenn immediately felt this rapid, paralyzing coldness run up his arm. He recognized the danger. He panicked, fought against her, and managed to rip the IV out of his arm to stop the injection.
He literally had to struggle with his nurse wife while he's in a hospital bed to save his own life. This just reinforces the point that her capacity for poisoning went far beyond the VAMC patients. It was rooted in controlling anyone close to her when she felt rejected.
It confirms the pattern perfectly. She used her specialized medical knowledge as a weapon against anyone who threatened her control or her status, whether it was her husband or a dependent patient. Glenn survived that terrifying encounter, which led to their immediate separation and eventual divorce in 1998.
So we have the mode of adrenaline, attention, and audience, and we have the pattern of calculated violence. The next crucial piece of the puzzle is how. How was she able to do this repeatedly without immediate detection in a high-alert environment like a VAMC?
The answer lies in her chosen weapon, what you could call the perfect poison.
Which was
Kristen Gilbert used lethal doses of epinephrine, which is commonly known as adrenaline. It's a powerful drug, a heart stimulant, that is routinely used to save lives during a cardiac arrest.
right.
But when you administer it to a relatively stable patient in a massive dose, it becomes instantly fatal.
What specifically does that overdose do to the body that makes it mimic a natural death?
A sudden lethal injection of epinephrine causes an explosive astronomical spike in heart rate and blood pressure. It often results in ventricular fibrillation or just a rapid, catastrophic cardiac arrest. For an elderly or an already frail veteran, the overwhelming stress on the cardiovascular system often leads to immediate, untreatable death.
And critically, why was it considered perfect for a serial murderer operating inside a hospital?
Because of its pharmacokinetics, how the body processes it. Epinephrine is a naturally occurring hormone. Once it's injected, it metabolizes incredibly quickly. Within hours, maybe even minutes, it leaves very little trace in the bloodstream.
So it's nearly impossible to detect.
Nearly impossible through routine toxicology screens performed days or weeks after a death. The initial post-mortem assessments would just conclude that the veterans died of sudden, natural causes related to their underlying conditions. That's exactly why the statistical anomaly was the first clue, not a toxicology report.
It must have required specialized testing, maybe even exhumation of bodies, to prove that unnaturally high levels of the drug were there.
It did.
Let's name the confirmed victims, the 4 veterans who were the subjects of her murder convictions.
The 4 veterans she was convicted of murdering were Stanley Jagodowski, who was 66, Henry Huden, just 35, Kenneth Cutting, 41, and Edward Squire, who was 69.
And the sources provide some heartbreaking details about just how vulnerable some of these men were.
They do. Stanley Jagodowski, he was a retired truck driver. He was admitted for post-operative issues that only required oral medication. He was relatively stable.
Okay.
But, crucially, a fellow nurse reported seeing Gilbert enter his room with a syringe just moments before he crashed.
Man Kenneth Cutting.
Kenneth Cutting, one of the later victims, was blind and suffered from multiple sclerosis. He was utterly dependent, unable to fight back or even signal for help. These were calculated choices based on fragility.
And Gilbert wasn't just the executioner. She consistently played the role of the hero. She would initiate the crisis, then respond to the code, often attempting resuscitation herself. It just reinforces that theory that the entire cycle was driven by her pathological need for the spotlight.
The attention was the ultimate reward. And we see further evidence of this need to control the entire crisis scenario in other suspicious actions cited by prosecutors.
Suspicious.
For example, in November of 1995, she allegedly abandoned a cardiac arrest patient until a colleague independently spotted the patient's severe distress. Only then did Gilbert finally raise the alarm.
So she was setting up the crisis but waiting for an external validation or the right audience before she fully engaged.
It seems so. And the power dynamics were so warped that she was actively endangering her colleagues as well as her patients.
How do you mean?
In another incident that same month, during a life-saving medical emergency, she forced an untrained colleague to use the cardiac defibrillation paddles because she refused to use the equipment herself.
Unbelievable.
It demonstrates a deep-seated controlling nature. She was putting others in direct harm's way, maybe to heighten the chaos and make her own presence and control seem even more essential.
And then there's the cold calculation related to her own schedule, tying a patient's death to her desire to leave work early.
Yes, the detail involving Kenneth Cutting is just chilling. Prosecutors highlighted that Gilbert asked a supervisor if she could leave work early if this very ill patient died.
And he did.
He passed away 40 minutes later. This moves beyond mere thrill-seeking. It implies she was using these manufactured deaths as a functional tool to manage her schedule and her relationship with Perot. She was scheduling murder around her own convenience.
So the body count is mounting, the epinephrine supply is dwindling. How long did it take for the nurses to realize that their dark joke was actually the terrifying truth? And what action did they take?
Well, the turning point came in 1996. The humor finally stopped because the data just became impossible to ignore. 3 nurses formally reported their concerns.
And what did they report specifically?
They cited not just the suspicious surge in cardiac deaths on Gilbert's shifts, but also the correlating and very noticeable decrease in the supply of epinephrine vials in the hospital's inventory, the missing drug. That was the physical evidence that triggered the internal investigation.
Gilbert didn't stick around to face the music once the spotlight shifted from her competence to her culpability, did she?
No, she did not. She left the hospital amid the investigation, claiming a workers' compensation injury. And she immediately spiraled into a profound state of emotional instability.
The classic pattern.
Classic BPD dysregulation. She began cycling through psychiatric hospitals that fall. She checked herself in 7 separate times, staying between 1 and 10 days each time. This frantic institutionalization was her classic response to loss of control and overwhelming stress.
But the investigators were patient, and they had a powerful informant, James Perot. The man she supposedly committed the crimes to impress was now cooperating with the authorities.
Yes. Perot had realized the monstrous truth about Gilbert and was working directly with the authorities. The crucial moment came while Gilbert was institutionalized in a psychiatric ward. She called him, trying desperately to reconcile or at least maintain some emotional control over him.
And he got her to confess.
Perot guided the conversation, and Gilbert, in a moment of, dramatic volatility and maybe some twisted pride, she confessed.
What was the exact nature of the confession? What gave the prosecution the unassailable evidence they needed?
It was direct and devastating. She told him, quote, "You know I did it. I did it. You wanted to know I killed those guys." And then she specified, by injection.
Wow.
This was the verbal confirmation linking her hand, the injection, and the veteran patients who died so suddenly.
And her reaction when she realized Perot had betrayed her trust and was actively testifying against her was immediate destructive retaliation. The classic Gilbert move.
Absolutely textbook destructive impulsivity. She called in a bomb threat to the VAMC.
A bomb threat.
The bomb threat. It was a desperate, destructive, and ultimately self-defeating act intended to create a massive disruption, derail the federal investigation, and punish everyone who had rejected her. Perot, her former colleagues, everyone.
And she was convicted for that crime first in April 1998.
Yes, she served 15 months for the bomb threat. And ironically, that time in federal custody gave the investigators the crucial window they needed to methodically consolidate the very complex murder case against her.
Right. They could compile all the forensic and statistical evidence to support a federal capital murder trial.
Exactly.
It's important to note, too, the scope of the suspicion that hung over her tenure. While she was convicted for 4 murders, the hospital staff's speculation was much, much wider.
Oh, much wider. Staff members believe she might have been responsible for as many as 80 deaths.
80.
80 deaths and over 300 medical emergencies. That enormous number just underscores the pervasive climate of fear and the level of manufactured chaos she inflicted on Ward C over her 7 years there, where every single code was potentially a deliberate act of murder.
So the final chapter came in the federal courtroom, and this trial became a major legal event because of the high stakes and the conflict between state and federal law.
It was a monumental legal showdown. She was convicted on March 14, 2001, on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and 2 counts of attempted murder.
And the critical legal nuance, the thing that put her life on the line, was jurisdiction.
That's right. Massachusetts had abolished the death penalty back in 1984. But the VAMC is federal property. Therefore, Gilbert was subject to the federal death penalty.
Which meant she was facing possible execution in a state that had otherwise outlawed capital punishment. That must have put immense pressure on the jury during the sentencing phase.
Absolutely.
What were the core arguments from the prosecution for the death penalty?
The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney William M. Welch II, argued forcefully. They focused on the aggravating factors. They emphasized the profound breach of trust, the vulnerability of her victims, veterans seeking care, and the cold, calculated nature of her actions.
They called her a shell of a human being.
They did. They said she killed for selfish, narcissistic reasons. And they sought to admit her 1998 bomb threat conviction as further evidence of her dangerous and, exactly. They were trying to persuade the jury that life imprisonment was the appropriate punishment, not death.
Her family also played a direct emotional role in appealing to the jury's mercy during this critical phase.
Yes. Her father, Richard Strickland, and her grandmothers, they delivered these tearful pleas. They asked the jury to spare her life for the sake of her two young sons. The emotional impact was clear, and it created a deep conflict for the jurors.
So they had to weigh the heinous nature of the crimes against the human cost of an execution.
And ultimately, the jury could not agree unanimously on the death penalty.
They didn't.
No. After deliberating for less than 6 hours on the penalty phase, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict. This lack of unanimity was Gilbert's saving grace. Under federal law, the sentence automatically defaulted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
The formal sentencing came shortly after that.
On March 27, 2001, U.S. District Judge Michael Ponser sentenced Gilbert to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years.
And before the sentencing, the victims' relatives had the chance to deliver impact statements.
They did. And it was Stanley Jagodowski's widow, Claire Jagodowski, who delivered one of the most heartbreaking statements.
What did she say?
Her words just captured the lasting, quiet devastation of the crime perfectly. She told the judge, "I still listened for his key in the door. Now I have to face old age alone."
Wow. That just brings home the reality that Gilbert's selfish pursuit of a thrill destroyed fundamental human lives and relationships.
It does. Gilbert waived her right to address the judge and wept softly as the sentence was read. Her legal saga didn't immediately end there, though.
Because of the appeals process.
Right. But this is another legal wrinkle. Gilbert later dropped her federal appeal in July of 2003. She did this intentionally to secure her life sentence because a new U.S. Supreme Court ruling at the time would have allowed prosecutors to pursue the death penalty again upon retrial.
So by foregoing her appeal, she eliminated the possibility of future execution.
Exactly. She's currently incarcerated at the Federal Medical Center Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas.
To truly understand how this intelligent nurse devolved into a serial killer, we have to move beyond the crimes themselves and look at the underlying pathology. What did her lifetime of volatility and manipulation suggest about her psychological makeup?
Well, we have to synthesize the behavior into the framework of personality disorders, specifically that volatile cluster B group. Gilbert's behavior unstable, intense relationships, a deeply distorted self-image, rapidly changing emotions led to a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
And how does BPD specifically manifest in the patterns we've discussed? The manipulation, the crises.
BPD is defined by a long-term pattern of instability and profound impulsivity. We see the intense idealization and then sudden, catastrophic devaluation of others.
Like with Perot.
Exactly. Her relationship with him, she idealized him as the audience for her performance, but the moment he rejected her, she impulsively responded with a destructive bomb threat. That frantic alternation is classic BPD relational instability.
And her reaction to the investigation, immediately checking herself into psychiatric wards over and over, that also aligns with the impulsive, self-destructive coping mechanisms of BPD.
Precisely. BPD sufferers often engage in impulsive behaviors or frantic attempts to avoid perceived abandonment. Her short, repeated institutionalization after the VMC investigation closed in was her way of seeking immediate containment and structure for the intense emotional dysregulation she was experiencing as her life fell apart.
But, BPD doesn't fully explain the cold, calculated nature of the poisoning, the total lack of empathy for the victims, and the thrill-seeking through death. That suggests something else, something darker.
Absolutely. Most psychologists involved in the case suspected strong comorbid traits from antisocial personality disorder, which has high overlap with psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder. This mix is what explains the lethal methodology.
Let's look at the psychopathic traits. How did that lack of empathy and the pursuit of sensory thrills manifest in the murders?
Psychopathic traits include high impulsivity, callous manipulation, and a need for immediate sensory gratification. Gilbert found the ultimate thrill in those manufactured emergencies, a controlled life-or-death scenario where she held absolute power. The manipulation of her victims, her colleagues, Perot, all to serve her selfish needs. It demonstrates the chilling lack of empathy inherent in ASPD.
And the narcissistic traits explain why she used death to showcase her perceived superiority.
That's the NPD component. Extreme self-centeredness, grandiosity, and the belief that her actions were justified because they served her need for validation. She was using the crimes to show off, to validate her perceived brilliance under pressure. She believed her right to attention and control was fundamentally more important than the lives of the men she was killing.
And the sources point to an early, horrifying example of cruelty that predates her time as a registered nurse. It confirms this long-standing disregard for the vulnerable was a core part of her character.
This is a crucial, dark footnote in her history. While working as a home health aide before she ever started at the VAMC, she deliberately scalded a mentally handicapped child with hot bath water.
It's just awful.
It wasn't a crime of passion, it was a cold act of violence against someone utterly defenseless. It confirms that the capacity for cruelty and the compulsion to misuse a position of trust were present long before she had the tools of a nurse to commit murder.
And finally, there's that strange, almost self-aggrandizing connection she loved to make regarding her birthplace.
The Lizzie Burden connection.
Yeah.
Gilbert was born in Fall River, Massachusetts, the same town as the infamous 19th century axe murderer. She would openly brag about this fact and even claim to be related to Borden.
Why?
She clearly viewed an association with historical violence and notoriety as a point of pride. It speaks volumes about her self-image and her deep, desperate need for recognition, regardless of whether that recognition was positive or terrifying.
It's a chilling detail that really wraps up the entire psychological profile. We see a woman defined by attention-seeking and pathological manipulation, who found the perfect lethal tool epinephrine and the perfect stage, a hospital ward filled with vulnerable veterans, to execute her perverse need for validation.
It's a tragic study in how the need for validation, when it's coupled with a severe, volatile mix of personality disorders and specialized knowledge, can become fatally destructive. The statistical unlikelihood of the deaths proved that the angel of death wasn't a joke, but a monster operating within the system.
The story of Kristen Gilbert really compels you to confront the extreme fragility of trust, especially in systems where the population is most vulnerable and relies completely on the integrity of their caretakers.
Indeed. What stands out to you most about that crucial moment? The transition from morbid workplace humor to the cold, hard realization that the nurse everyone trusted was actually the threat. How does a system designed for care miss a probability of 1 in 100 million for so long?